Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast. I am your co-host. Oh, whoa, that's a lot of coast. Crina Mustafa, alongside my co-host, Calvin Wetzel. It feels like every week I discover some sort of new pun or play on words just by fully accident. So you're getting the real S. Would you agree with that, Calvin?
Yeah, you Dr. Seussing out here, Cree. I love it
I know, it's
with
like
all
I
your
feel like I don't
rhymes.
yeah, like I don't even do the same intro every week, so I feel like that's why I start to discover all these different puns. But anyway, moving on, and I'm sure we'll have lots of puns today at some point, but we have a lot to get into. First thing being the WNBA playoffs, the semifinals. We got the two series, Sun, Libs, Wings, Aces, both in two very different spots right now. So we'll get into all that. We'll also talk a little bit about MVP slash voting because that's kind of a big discussion this week in particular. And lastly, we will get to either our last or second last awards of this year, and that will be Rookie of the Year and our All Rookie team. Very excited to get into it. Just an FYI warning: Rookie of the Year should be a lock, but we're going to discuss a lot of very, very fun rookies and kind of what we liked from them this year. So, should be a very fun conversation. You ready, Cal?
Yeah, you know I'm always ready to chat hoops with you, Cree. Let's go.
Let's go. Okay. We'll start with the series that is tied 1-1 right now, the Connecticut Sun, the New York Liberty. If you guys missed it, the Sun took that first game kind of heavily, if we're being honest. And then the Liberty were able to bounce back in game two. So I guess the biggest question to start off with is how did the Liberty bounce back to take game two?
Yeah, I think the Liberty bounced back large part because Benijah Laney bounced back. She had 20 points. She had 3 in the first game. That was a huge part of their offense, and they only scored, what was it, 63 points in that first game. So
Yeah.
obviously the offense that we've seen some really explosions from all season was nowhere to be found in that first game. And even in the second game, I think he still had it didn't really look fully there. The announcers kind of touched on this during the game, but some of their possessions, just even when they did score, looked like they were had to work really hard to get those points, which is credit to the Sun defense. But I thought the Sun were maybe a little bit too comfortable leaving Benijah Laney and help and sort of abandoning her to go sort of sell out on some of those other players and on drives and post ups. And that she made him pay, and really Courtney Vandersloot too. Although, but if you got to pick someone to leave, maybe that's who you leave. But
Yeah.
they left both of them open quite a bit throughout the game, I think, and Liberty were able to find, especially in the second half, I think, really able to find them. Sloot and Laney on when out of doubles and when the help defense left, and they shot 8 for 12 from three. They made him pay. So I think that was the difference, and that's something that I'll be interested to see what the Sun do on defensively in game three in terms of the chess match. And then on the other end, the Liberty zone was a big deal, I think, on defense
Mhm.
that really helped them bounce back too. They talked about that a lot on the broadcast. And I think they did have a few breakdowns that led to some, open buckets for Tip Hayes. But overall, I think the zone worked pretty well. So that's another part of the chess match that we'll see what happens in game three.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned Courtney Vandersloot because that was kind of one of the biggest things I noticed where she was making open shots that she normally doesn't make. And like honestly, like it's like especially when I'm specifically on the three-point side because we know that she can drive to the rim, but I think that was one of the biggest things having her be in double digits in points was kind of huge for them to maintain a lead. I know it was like a little bit more back and forth in this game. I think one of the biggest things was that the Liberty kind of held their composure, where I feel like in game one, it was very competitive to start and then very quickly got away from them. They got way more physical in game two. I feel like sometimes you would watch some of the possessions, I would feel the tension of just like how the players were against each other. I think also, Sabrina kind of I think there were people who were joking. I was in the dunker spot playback during the game, and like people were calling Sabrina like a foul free throw line merchant, and just kind of getting Beck Allen in foul trouble, which I thought was kind of funny. But like honestly, like credit to her because like it worked. So yeah, I think like a lot of things happened. I'm very curious to see what's gonna happen now in game three, just because like even though the Libs won the game, I'm still feeling a little bit iffy about how this series is kind of going for them so far. Like it didn't feel like a win that made me feel comfortable in saying that like, oh, they've got it from here. And like it kind of sucks that the Sun had to lose this game with that big 30-point game from Tip Hayes, who was absolutely incredible for the Sun in this matchup. And I extremely loved her trash talking as well. Just like yelling
You
at
can't
Sabrina
guard
saying,
me.
"You can't guard me," which is like unfortunate, but like not entirely false. But yeah, no, I just love stuff like that. I think also Jonquel Jones is like a player that we've been talking a lot for the Liberty, kind of being the X factor and just her strength and just her determination and just confidence and when she has the ball in her hands, like it's very hard to defend her going up at the rim because like her footwork is so good. She just like when she just goes right up there, she can be a really, really tough player to go up against. So yeah, no, a lot of different things happening for the Liberty right now. And I think and we'll talk about the keys for the game into going into game 3, but now they are going to Connecticut. They had the first 2 games in New York City. They're going to Connecticut. They got 2. The question here is who closes it out, and do we go to a game 5 in New York? Like, do you see this getting split at the Suns home?
I do. I do think we go to a game 5. I think I fully agree with everything you said about the I don't really feel inspired with confidence with the Liberty here despite the win. It felt like
Mm-hmm.
in the same way a lot of those offensive possessions felt like maybe they scored here, but it wasn't that same easy, free flowing, beautiful type of scoring that we saw at times in the regular season. It was a much more grinded out, work really hard to get these points on the board. And it felt like the whole game was, they had to work really hard to get that win. That was not an easy win. And I think the Sun are right there. The Sun are going to take one in Connecticut, no doubt. But I'm not sure if they take 2. So I think we're going to a game 5. I wanted to talk about someone we haven't mentioned yet. You talk about Jonquel Jones and being the X factor. And I think kind of on the flip side of that, you can look at Olivia Nelson-Ododa for the Sun. Uh, and she's been an X factor for them and what she's been able to do on both sides, but especially like defensively against Jonquel. JJ has 10 buckets in this series. One of them's a 3, 9 twos. 8 of those are in the first quarter with DeWanna Bonner on her before Olivia Nelson-Ododa even came into the game. So she essentially hasn't been able to score when Olivia Nelson-Ododa comes into this game and really changes the defense for the Connecticut Sun, which I think has been huge for them. So that's something that I'll look to see kind of if Sandy makes any adjustments to sort of get JJ going and establish her when they do have, Ono in the game. Because obviously when they don't, they're smaller. We've all seen the Sun have gone a lot smaller for most of the season since Bree Jones got hurt with their starting lineup. But then they bring in Olivia and gives them more size. So that's something that I've been really intrigued by in the first 2 games and looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
Yeah, and on that note, like for the keys for the next matchup, I think, Olivia Nelson-Ododa is going to be an interesting factor because, the Libs did adjust to play that zone defense, which does affect who's on the floor for the Connecticut Sun. So that might affect whether Olivia is on the floor or not, depending on what the Libs are kind of throwing at them and who Stephanie White decides like is going to be that kind of breath of fresh offensive air for whatever minutes the players that she chooses are going to get. But yeah, no, that's going to be interesting. I think even on the Liberty side, they got to keep making that extra pass because like you kind of touched on at the beginning, they have so many options of people who can score and like just unlocking Benijah Laney's potential. I mean, I made a joke. Okay, so we talked about puns at the beginning of this pod. Yesterday I tweeted out Laney in transition in her Laney, which I thought was pretty funny. I'm definitely not the first person to say that, but yeah, no, just like stuff like that. Like Benijah is so good playing in transition. So just unlocking different parts of the Liberty offense, I think is going to help them maybe try to get a more comfortable win or get a win that they feel a little bit more like themselves in. But yeah, do you have any keys to the matchup for either team for this next
Yeah,
game?
well, I think someone else that the Liberty really need to unlock is Brianna Stewart. It sounds obvious, but she's
Yeah.
on one of the worst shooting stretches of her career right now. She's shooting in the last 5 games. You can go back to the last game of the regular season here, which didn't really matter for them. Obviously, they were more or less locked into the 2 seed at that point. But you go back to the last 5 games, 2 for 27 from 3, 7% from 3, 27% from the field. This is the MVP, and this is someone who came into the playoffs with the highest scoring average in WNBA history. So I think I was texting some people this today. If you're the Liberty and you're looking at your playoffs and okay, we're 3-1, and Brianna Stewart's basically missing 3/4 of her shots, that's a win. It's a win that you're 3 and
Yeah.
1. But she's got to find her stroke pretty soon because you're not going to win 3 out of your next 4, and you're definitely not going to win a championship if you don't get her going.
That's a thing too, right? Like, if they get out of this series against the Sun, most likely you are gonna be facing the Las Vegas Aces, who we're gonna get to in a second here. And I think, like, she needs to be, like, on her game, like, at her best if we want this to be as close of a series as we're hoping for. So, yeah, no, I definitely like that. Yeah, MVP, which we'll also get into a little bit later. But let's get to Aces versus Wings. First, the Aces took a 2-0 series lead. They have a chance to close it out. Their next game is Friday, September 29 at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2. And I guess the easy question is this series a sweep, or do the Wings take at least one game at home and try to extend it a little bit longer?
I do think this is a sweep, but there are some things that the Wings could do to prove me wrong, certainly. I think for Dallas, it starts with finishing. I had to
Oh,
get some wordplay. You get all the
Galaxy
wordplay
brain.
going, so I had to get my own in there. It starts with finishing. They missed a lot of, and granted, you can give a lot of credit to the Aces defense for this. Asia Wilson, Defensive Player of the Year. Obviously, it's really tough to finish at the rim with her and there. Kia Stokes as well. When you have that combo, it's brutal. But the Wings missed 29 shots inside of 7 feet in game 2. 29. You're not going to beat any. I don't care if it's the Aces or anybody else. You're not going to beat anyone like that. Aces haven't missed that many all series. You have to. And some of them obviously are blocked or heavily contested by Asia or Kia Stokes, but some of them you just got to finish if you're
Yeah.
the Wings when you get some offensive rebounds and you get these looks right there. So you're really going to have to start making your layups and putbacks if you want any chance at an upset. And the series is over. I'm sorry, Dallas. You're not going to come back and win the series, but I think winning game 3 would be a big deal still to them. I think it sounds cliche, but when you have a young team sort of building that confidence, getting some morale, say, hey, we were able to take a game from one of the best teams ever, going into next year, I think that matters. So, yeah, that's really something the Wings need to clean up for game 3.
Yeah, and I think honestly it could go either way. I think the rational part of my brain is saying that the Aces are probably going to sweep the Wings, but I don't think that, like, taking a game at home is out of the question for the Wings, especially because game 2 was closer than game 1 was, and I think they were a little bit more competitive. And they just, missed a ton of shots and were not able to get it to get over that hump. So I think, like, that's probably a reason that Dallas could potentially take a game, but then I just think the Aces would probably just wrap it up in the next game after that. So I'm like, not like, I don't think the Wings can win 3 in a row. But I think they could take one. So I think the series might go 4, but it probably will be a sweep. I guess just, like, thoughts on the key players and their performances. Like, if you look at the Aces, like, their core 4, Asia, Chelsea, KP, Jackie, I think they've all been really impressive so far, especially, like, I feel like Jackie's just been really confident these first 2 games of the semifinals. Like, she hit, I can't remember if, I think that was game 1 where she, like, hit that shot and then she just kind of gave us, like, a pose after. Like, I love seeing that from, like, a player who doesn't really show a lot of emotions. And I think, like, one of the biggest things with Jackie too that we've kind of talked about all season is how much stronger she feels. Like, she's been in the gym working, and that's, like, showing through now. I thought KP did a good job of making shots last night, because I know we've hit strides in the season where it was a little bit iffy in terms of, like, her shot making. So I was really impressed with her. And then obviously Asia, Chelsea, both really great games. Asia with a 30-point game. Chelsea was also, like, I think 22 points. And also just being a great facilitator, as she always is. But yeah, I think, on the wing side, I mean, Natasha Howard was kind of struggling early. Tierra McCowan, my favorite part was like when she was getting like really upset in game 2. I think she was like getting frustrated and then she just kind of hit that jumper and then they went to a timeout after. She was just like, I'm done. Let's just come on. Like we gotta be better. So yeah, I think there's a lot of like varying factors like on the wings of who needs to kind of step up and perform. And it really does have to be a team effort from everybody. Obviously, it's a team game, but like that's where you see kind of the difference in the Aces experience versus the Wings experience, and you kind of see like which core just kind of has more experience doing it together and who actually like shows up in these moments. So yeah, it's tough. I know like the whole narrative too, like not to go on a long spiel, but like the Wings did take was like the only team at one point during the season to beat like the Aces, the Liberty, and the Sun, which is also another reason why I think they could take that game 3 and then just like extend it to 4. But yeah, nothing is out of the question. I think anything's possible. And the fact that it was like hovering kind of around 10 to 12 points as a lead rather than like getting gobsmacked by like 20 plus points. I think that they can take that with them, and it's just a matter of like tightening up some of those possessions and just a matter of executing down the stretch as well. So yeah, do you have any more
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, the fact that they kept it to single digits, like you said, is that's important. You can kind of tell, like you said, that the playoff experience, shows up in the body language, I think. But I think it was really important that they got Arike going kind of late, even though it ended up sort of not mattering for the result. We've seen the Aces defend her really well, I think, all season. They've held her below 15 points 4 times this year, which like is the most of any team in her whole career, and they did it all in this season. So for her to finally sort of show some signs of life offensively, I think in that fourth quarter down the stretch was a big deal for Dallas. Something that hopefully she carries into game 3, especially at home. She's that type of player. She gets cooking a little bit, hits a couple threes, and sort of gets that home crowd going, and it's a
Oh
snowball
yeah.
effect. And I think if you see some of that, Dallas has a real shot. Absolutely.
Yeah,
But
especially if like Satu feels more comfortable at home too. Like there's like so many different factors. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And it's just
contagious.
like yeah, exactly. And I think, momentum is a very real thing. And I think this is one of those losses where like even though it's a loss, I think there's some good things you can pull and some things where you're like, well, we're not gonna do this that poorly again. Hopefully going into the next one. But yeah, we'll see if this is a sweep if we got our brooms out. It's interesting because like if it is a sweep, I imagine that Sun or Liberty are going to want to wrap this up real quick and get as much rest as possible and not have it go to 5. But we'll see. We'll see what happens in this next week or so. All right, let's talk about MVP because all of the 3 top candidates in Stewie, Asia, AT, they're all still in the playoffs currently. The news came out this week that Brianna Stewart of the New York Liberty won the award. The voting results were displayed and it was very, very close. And there were some interesting takeaways slash observations that kind of came out of this whole situation. Cal, I'll give it to you first because I know you have some thoughts on the whole like voting ordeal. So yeah, take it away. What's
I
your
I do.
thoughts on
I
this?
do. I honestly don't. A lot of people have a problem with maybe Brianna Stewart winning, or maybe how the first, second, third place votes went, or whatever the case. Like that. That is what it is. Like to me, these 3 players had amazing seasons. No wrong answer, whatever. But then you start looking further down the ballot, as they say, and we have some serious problems here. Number one, Chelsea Gray will be the first person to tell you that she didn't have a better season than Asia Wilson. So whoever voted for her over Asia, flat out wrong. Number 2, I love Courtney Vandersloot as much as the next person. We've given her some love on this podcast. She was not a top 5 player in the league this year. And again, she'll be the first person to tell you that. So
Yeah.
whoever had her on their ballot, completely wrong. But to me, this is more of a symptom of what I am starting to think is sort of a award voter problem across women's sports, because what I think you have in women's sports, you obviously have, and to use the WNBA as an example, you have some voters who are extremely plugged in. They're either beat reporters or national reporters who are locked in on the WNBA. LaChina Robinson, Tarika Foster Brasby, Christina Williams, our friends Mark Schiller, Miles Ehrlich. And then you have some voters who are maybe not as much WNBA reporters, but sports reporters. And this is
Yeah.
true in college basketball. This is probably true in other women's sports that I don't follow as much. Someone could tell me if I'm right or wrong about that. But these people who are maybe covering football and men's basketball and women's basketball and baseball and all of these sports, and women's basketball is just not on top of their radar. But they get a vote because they have this sort of platform of this big media job that covering all these sports. And this is true at any level. You go down to like conference awards, like for me covering the Missouri Valley Conference women's basketball in college, it's the same thing. Some of the voters are very locked in and some of them barely pay any attention to women's basketball. They're covering every single sport. I'm sorry, but those people shouldn't have a vote, because if you're not locked in on the sport and you don't know that, there were way more than 5 players better than Courtney Vandersloot, like, you shouldn't have a vote. This stuff matters. So to that, like,
Mhm.
that bothers me. And I mean, who knows? Because the other problem is we don't have voter transparency, right? So technically, I don't even know whether I'm actually correct that some of these people just don't know and they just had no idea, or whether they fully knew that, for example, Asia was easily a top 3 player and they intentionally put her fourth just to be a hater, That it
Yeah.
might be that too, but we don't know because there's no transparency. So that's another huge problem. I just think we need to fix some of these problems that we have with awards voting in all women's sports. And in this, the WNBA MVP was like a blatant example of it.
Yeah, and I kind of like went on Twitter and just talked about this too from like my perspective on the whole situation is that, and it's kind of what you hit on, is like a lot of people aren't, first of all, they're not getting paid to cover women's sports full time, or the WNBA full time, or they're just not covering that specific league full time. So that's where you get a lot of holes because not enough resources are being put into women's basketball, not only the players and stuff, but to the media who are covering the league as well. I think there's a major, major hole there. And like, as uncomfortable as it is, it's very, very apparent. And I think that's part of the problem. I think one of the solutions, and I'm not saying it's the only solution, but it's one of the solutions, is putting enough resources in to create those full-time jobs that are just specifically catered towards covering women's basketball or covering the WNBA, and just having that be your sole thing. Because a lot of the problem is probably that like people are just not as tapped in as they should be. And it is hard. I think like with the voter transparency, I was kind of thinking about this yesterday, but if I understand like the argument that they don't want to release the names because they don't want the voters to be like harassed, especially, if they're women, I think you could reach kind of like a tricky situation. However, I think maybe another alternative could be releasing the names of the platforms that get votes, because that way you can kind of narrow it down to who on the team might be getting that vote, and then they can choose whether they want to come forward or not. But then at least like out of this many national writers, like they're coming from these publications or like these like team, like every team has a certain number of voters, but there's also so many national people that like we just don't know where the platforms are. Like we know ESPN is one of them because they are the biggest like media conglomerate in the country, but legit, like if we had a list of the platforms that are allowed to have their staff writers and reporters vote, and I feel like that could also be helpful in just kind of determining and like where this is coming from, because then you also know what that platform's coverage looks like, and that kind of helps you give some more insight into, okay, so this is where these voters are coming from, in terms of like resources, in terms of perspectives, in terms of biases, like all these different factors. So yeah, I would be interested in a list like that to kind of bypass some of that hesitancy that comes with releasing like specific voters' names. I think it's just kind of like a tricky situation overall. Um, but yeah, that was kind of my take on it. I think it's also just weird. Like I understand the way the voting points system is ranked, but it's also just kind of, you kind of scratch your head a little bit where you see that like the second place points are kind of what decided. So like even though AT had the most first place votes, she didn't win. And like when you originally like just look at that, you're like, huh, that doesn't make sense. But then you see like how many, how many second place votes Brianna Stewart had, and just like I think that like fourth place vote for Asia like really messed things up too. And like I don't know, like I look at that list and I'm like, you can't have two players who are on the same team being voted for. Like that's just crazy to me because that's not what MVP is, right? Like to have like both Asia and Chelsea when it should just have been Asia, to have Brianna Stewart, Courtney Vandersloot, and Sabrina Ionescu on that list is like so beyond outrageous. It is so beyond outrageous. Like that's three players from the same team. Like that's just not MVP. Like that's not what like you guys, whoever did that, like go back to your dictionary and like search up the word most valuable player, because like more than one player is not the correct answer to that. So yeah, like I definitely understand a lot of the outrage. I think though, like those top three candidates all had historic seasons, and we kind of talked about on the pod too, like every player kind of had a different context and different meaning to their teams based on just like the situation that each team was in. So every voter could also look at that differently. But yeah, some of that outside factors and outside players, I think, was a very interesting scenario.
Yeah, if you aren't able to come forward and say who your vote was, then to me, like that's just admitting that you were wrong. Because if you believe you were right, then you should have no problem saying it. But that's a great idea on your part. I think at least let's know the publications where these are coming from, because this is like it's not something that you see in like the NFL. You're not like, obviously there's gonna be some votes that people are, or in the NBA that people are going to disagree with, but everyone who votes on the NFL MVP is going to be very, very plugged into the NFL and have watched tons of games throughout the year, know a lot about the league. And I'm not saying like the WNBA is the same as the NFL. I just think the WNBA deserves 60 voters who know what they're talking about and who
Yeah.
pay attention to women's basketball. That's all I'm saying. And so, yeah, I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, and it's also just tough because at that point, like, let's say your vote does get taken away, like, do you still have your job? Like, are you still like knowledgeable enough in women's basketball that like that's also a consequence that I was kind of thinking about the other day, where I was like, what if it was somebody that's like actually like women's basketball is their job, but like for some reason has gotten away with like not knowing stuff or not doing their research properly, or like is like choosing Asia fourth just to be a hater? Like, what happens then? But I don't know. That's like, we'll see what happens in the future with that stuff and exposing voters, to put it kind of not lightly. But let's move on from the MVP conversation. We'll move on to our rookie of the year / all rookie team, which, oh, by the way, the our rookie of the year candidate also got an MVP vote. So but no,
Yeah, how
let's
about
go to
that, huh?
rookie of the year. How about that? She got one. I think she got one vote. I forgot, like it was like fourth or fifth place. I don't even remember. But
I think she'll be another one to tell you that she was not deserving of that. She will be
I
at some
yeah.
point. Not yet.
I started joking about her on Twitter. It was really funny. But in case you haven't clued in by now, we are talking about Miss Aaliyah Boston of the Indiana Fever, #1 draft pick this year. I think, and you think, we all think that she's probably going to win Rookie of the Year. And if you have an argument about that, I don't really know what to tell you, because she's a Rookie of the Year. Cal, you want to add on
It's
to that?
not probably. It's not probably. It's 100%. Now, what I'm interested in with all these crazy votes that we've been seeing is it going to be unanimous? Because it should be, and if not, then whoever didn't vote for her, let's take their vote away too. Let's find out who that is, because
And
that's going to
you
be
just know that's going to happen.
someone's going to vote for someone else. There's going to be like two
I,
people,
I didn't
and
even
it's going to
think
be just
about
as
that.
egregious as Asia getting fourth.
Oh my
But
God, you're
you know it's
totally
gonna
right.
happen. I'm like
Yeah.
preemptively upset about it, but it's Aaliyah Boston. There's no question. End of
Yeah.
discussion. The all rookie team is a much better discussion. Not because we could talk about Leah Boston all day. It's a great discussion, but whether she should win or
Mhm.
not is not a discussion at all.
Yeah.
She's had one of the best rookie seasons in the last few years. I think, really, not just this year. And she's
Mhm.
been really impressive to me on the offensive end. Like, we knew obviously she was efficient, and she saw triples all the time, doubles and triples at South Carolina, and her defense was elite. But what she's been able to do on the offensive end at the pro level right away, I think is extremely impressive to me. And I would argue she maybe was more valuable on that side of the ball for the Fever than on the defensive side, which is not to take anything away from her defense, which is great as well. But that's been the biggest thing I've been impressed with her.
Yeah, I think the transition was really smooth. And I know a lot of rookies have trouble sometimes, like it's a totally different environment. Like a lot of rookies have talked about, like how different of a standard it is when you move to that professional league. But it feels like she didn't miss a step and she just looked so good. And those triple teams didn't stop once she hit the professional league. Like teams were still attacking her like that. So I think, just what she meant to this Indiana Fever team who now is super excited about their future. Like, yeah, their record was what it was, but at one point they were in that top 8 running in the league. They had some really good bursts, and she just remained the superstar at the front of it all. So I've been really impressed with Aaliyah Boston. She's like any excitement you had about her going to a professional league, like those expectations were reached. And I'm super excited to see how this team continues to build with her kind of at the forefront of that. But let's move on to some of our other rookies. Now, we have some that we think are going to be a lock, and then we're going to kind of talk about them and then maybe who else we might sub in. But Aaliyah Boston, definitely a lock. Diamond Miller, I would say, is also a lock. Dorka Juhas, Jordan Horston. Those are our 4 that are a lock. Would you agree, Hal?
Yeah, those are the 4 that I have as a lock, and then I have this entirely too long list, which is more about shouting out some good players than it is about really all of these are necessarily in contention for that 5th spot. But you're definitely looking at those 4 for me, and then you're talking about Lee Mung, Zia Cook. This is in no particular order. Haley Jones, even the Sky had I think a couple players in Robin Parks and Morgan Birch, and then the one that I would put in that 5th spot. Anyone who knows me is not going to be shocked by this at all. This is I tried to use my head and not my heart for this pick, but I think my head agrees with my heart here. Is Grace Berger. I think Grace Berger, when we got done talking about the Fever and Aaliyah Boston being at the forefront of that, and Grace Berger has been such a good compliment to her. And she's shooting upper 40s from 3, obviously on really low volume, but she's been incredible shooting the ball. And we're going to see her range continue to develop, I think, throughout the next few years of her career. Defensively, Grace Berger has been extremely impressive, especially for a rookie. Whether it's on film, I think you don't have to look at any numbers to know this. If you just watch her play basketball and watch her lock down people, but she has the athleticism, so it shouldn't be a surprise necessarily. She comes in with like a pro ready body, but I've been really impressed, and you can put numbers to this too, which I'm going to. I have to. I'm like the Her Hoop stats guy. So
Yeah.
the Indiana Fever are 6 points per possession better on defense with her on the court, which there's only 7 players in the league who did that, and Jordan Horston's the only other rookie. So I think that's a big deal for the Fever, who obviously were lacking on that side of the ball, maybe before they brought in this rookie class. And
Yeah.
we should talk about Jordan Horston's defense too, by the way. I don't mean to gloss over that, because I think she's someone who the numbers aren't going to do her justice when you look at her impact because of how she was able to guard multiple positions and rebound on the defensive end. But to me, I think Grace Berger's defense puts her on this list with those forward locks.
And I'd even add on too with Grace Berger, just the way that she was able to unlock Aaliyah Boston on the offensive side of the floor too. Like just the passes that she would make to her. I think that was also something that just kind of stuck out to me as like something really impressive to see. And it's also cool that like 2 rookies would just like really gel like that together on a team that's like really working towards development and getting better. I think that's really important. So yeah, I think I would also have Grace Berger on there. Diamond Miller also we should talk about a little bit because she was out for a little bit with injury, but like there was like a small stretch where people were like, "Oh, is she gonna be in conversation for Rookie of the Year?" Which like still think Aaliyah Boston is the clear winner. However, like just that in and of itself, I think, just shows like how impressive Diamond Miller's growth over the season was, especially because I feel like at the beginning of it, she was playing well. I just felt like she wasn't really confident in a lot of her shot making. And I think that kind of confidence she got a little bit more comfortable as the season went on when she returned from injury as well. I think that was one of the biggest things where like she's got all the right pieces, she's got all the right stuff. It's just a matter of like, hey, like just be confident in it. Like your footwork is good, like your intentions are really good. And I think we saw her grow, especially on a Lynx team that made the playoffs, was very competitive towards the end of the season, who also had another exciting rookie with Dorka. Like, I just think like it was such a good environment for her to be in, and just kind of have leadership around her too, as well, to kind of just like help, like pump up some of that confidence a little bit more. Cause I think she's got the skill set. It's just a matter of executing. And I think she got better with that as the season went on.
Yeah, and it's impressive for her to be, a critical part of that Lynx team that was a playoff team, like you said, won a playoff game. So that
Yeah.
in right away in her career, she was an integral part of that. And that stretch that you brought up where people started to think, oh, does she have a shot? That was when Nafisa Collier was hurt, obviously. And so people were thinking, not sure how long she was out. Is Diamond going to start going off here because of this added opportunity? And she did a little bit. We saw her, when she sort of had the opportunity. And that was before Kayla McBride really got going, too. So there was like a week where Diamond Miller was almost sort of the alpha of this team, between sort of Nafisa Collier and Kayla McBride. And we saw glimpses of what she can be during that week
Mm-hmm.
that I think we'll see more consistently going forward throughout her career. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially when she's healthy too. That'll be a big factor for sure. So we talked a little bit about Dorka. Let's talk about, or we could talk about Jordan Horston before I move on to the non-locks, because I think like her season also kind of went a little bit under the radar just because the Storm were not very good. Like it was just, there's no better way to put that. But and I talked, I think I talked about it on this podcast too, where at one point I got to talk to her before, I think it was a game against the Mercury, but just kind of ask her what it's like to defend against like multiple positions and just like really tough players and vets and just like these hard people who are just like, whoa, I'm going up against her. Like that's crazy. And just like getting her perspective on that was really cool. It really reminded me of like Michaela Onyewere's like rookie season with the Liberty, where she was getting a ton of minutes and starting and just being like a defensive monster and like trying and learning the ropes of like how to defend the other players in the league, because they will make you work and they will try to give you a welcome to the league moment if you're a rookie. So I just think it's like even more impressive when you're able to hold your own. And yeah, I think like her mindset was always like super cool throughout the entire season. Like, I can do this. Like, I do belong here. So yeah, I thought she was pretty impressive as a rookie, regardless of team record.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think she really got thrown into the fire, right away in her
Yeah.
career in terms of who
You
she was
mean in the
having to
Storm?
guard.
She got thrown into the
No, she got
Storm?
thrown. Yeah, there you go. There you go. I wish I physically can't snap. Otherwise, I'd be snapping for you right now. Uh,
What? You can't snap?
I can't watch this. See, look, when I do it, like no sound comes out. I don't know if everyone tries to teach me how, and it doesn't work. I completely got us off on a tangent. But if
Yeah,
you're
just
watching on YouTube, see what I'm doing. Tell me if I'm doing anything wrong.
his
Put it in
form
the
is
comments.
terrible.
If someone, is my form off? My snapping
Yeah,
form? Is that what it
you're
is?
like going like this. I don't even
Wait,
know what
okay. What
this
do
is.
I?
Just
Oh,
use your
where?
fingers.
You should teach me off air probably, because
Yeah, I'll do it off air.
or maybe this is interesting to people. I don't know if this is boring or interesting to people. Hold on,
People are
hold on. Do it one
listening
more
like,
time. Is it? Is that? Is did it?
it's like iffy. Okay. People are like, how did they go from talking about the Jordan
Yeah.
Horson's
Also, like no
defense
one's
to
watching on YouTube.
snapping?
Everyone's listening on Apple, so everyone's definitely bored by this because they can't see what I'm doing. I apologize to all the people. I don't even know what we were talking about. Oh, the
We're talking
storm.
about
I was
the
snapping for your
Storm, yeah.
pun. She was
Yeah.
thrown right into the fire / storm with it in
Hmm.
terms of who she was asked to guard. Um, and I think she really stepped up to the plate, to be honest. Obviously, she had a few welcome to the league moments. Who doesn't? But it's gonna pay dividends in the long run. And when you look at the team she was on, like, yeah, they had Sammy Wickham, they had, Jewel Lloyd to maybe help out with some of that perimeter defense. But in terms of like big wing defense, and then Ezzy, of course, is great on the defensive end,
Yeah.
just in terms of rim protection. But when you talk about like big wing defenders, which I think is like an important sort of role in general basketball, is that big wing defender. Like that was Jordan Horston on that team. And so she was asked to guard a lot of extremely good veteran players throughout the career, or throughout the season. And I think she did a great job. And I would be remiss to not bring up a couple other names that I didn't really mention yet. While we're talking about the Storm, I'm just thinking in terms of rookies, Jade Melbourne and Dulcie Fankam-Mengiadu on the Storm, I think showed a lot of flashes this year too. So I'm excited to see what the Storm can become with those three, with Jewel Lloyd back, but in particular what Jordan Horston can become on the defensive end.
Would you say you're excited to see what Storm is brewing?
I would. I would. I would say that. I would snap for that one too,
Um,
but
please
as
don't.
you said,
Please don't.
I can't.
We're all
I'm not gonna
good.
go back there.
But there is I'm dead. There is one rookie that I did want to touch on who I think like her stats won't necessarily show, maybe a reason to make her that fifth player on this all rookie team. But like Haley Jones is somebody that I think has a lot of potential. And I honestly think she should have had more minutes than she did this year. And hopefully that's something that kind of changes in her sophomore year. But I think we saw that, like, she's a really good facilitator on the offensive side, but then she can also score. Like, I just think she brings like a really good level of adaptability and flexibility to your roster when she is on the court. And I was really impressed with her. Like, we saw when Atlanta was starting to get hit with injuries and she was getting more minutes, like she did really well. And I was honestly like really impressed with her. I always loved watching her in college, and I would love to watch more of her in the W. So I'm always going to be an advocate for more Haley Jones minutes. But yeah, I think like she definitely deserves some flowers for the flashes that we did see this year. And I'm hoping that her minutes continue to grow, because I think she's a player that had a lot of questions about her transitioning to the pros for some reason, which I never really understood. But I think like she has what it takes to stay in the W and to actually be a very impactful player for whatever team she's on, which right now is the dream, but we'll see like kind of where her career goes. But yeah, she's a player that I wanted to give some flowers to, because I really enjoyed her at Stanford, and I really enjoy her in the W. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit it. She definitely deserves some more minutes. Sometimes it's tough. I think that's maybe the benefit that someone like Jordan Horston has on playing on a team like the Storm, is that
Yeah.
you're every opportunity for minutes is going to be there. And if you're playing on a team that's sort of chasing that playoff spot, the rotations are going to look a little bit different. But she still deserves some more minutes. And the questions you brought up, people had obviously about her shooting. Maybe some of those questions still exist, but it doesn't happen in 1 year. And shooting is one of the most easily teachable and improvable skills in
Hmm.
basketball. And I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of people that we think of as pretty good shooters across the league now who really weren't good shooters in college and weren't good shooters in their rookie year. I think you could probably look at Benijah Laney's rookie year 3-point shooting numbers. I don't think they were very good. And now we're talking about Benijah Laney as being someone that the Sun probably shouldn't have helped off as much, because she burned them and went 5 for 7 for 3 or whatever it was. So uh, she could absolutely get there, and I would love to see her get that opportunity, because I agree with you. I think she showed a lot of flashes.
I actually love the Laney comparison, because if you want to look at somebody whose, career has kind of been all over the place and like kind of looking for that stability and just kind of development in her game, like in 2021, she was the Liberty's best player, like hands down. And she still is very much in that top list of like the best players on the Liberty team, even in this like quote unquote super team era. So I think like that's actually a very good example of what Haley could be like in terms of just like development and minutes and opportunities, environment, situations, all of that. But yeah,
Yeah.
those are kind of like, do you have any other rookies that you want to
Well, I just want to
give
say
a
real quick. So I pull up Laney's stats because now I had to know. I brought it up, and like I'm not comparing these two overall, just as they're like obviously they're different players, but like just in
Yeah.
terms of the arc of development, like you said, Laney shot 39% from three on almost 4 attempts a game this year. That's a good shooter. That's someone that you don't want to leave. And when you look at her first 3 seasons in the league, she was a combined 1 for 16. She only took 16 threes. She only made one of them. So she was a non-threat from 3, and now she's a legit shooter who's almost 40%. She has shot 40% in her career in 2020 from 3. So why can't Haley Jones be that? Who knows? Like,
Mhm.
let's give her the chance. Maybe she becomes a legit shooter 4 years from now. You gotta give it some time, but that's not something that I would have, not drafted her high for whatever people were saying, like, you can't take her because she can't shoot. You draft people and develop them. So that's
Yeah,
my thoughts
and
on Haley
I was
too.
also thinking, like, staying on the Stanford front as well, like, Lexi Hall is an example of that too, who, like, she definitely had a lot of welcome to the league moments in her rookie year.
She tweeted one
Um,
out, I think, or Instagram, whatever she posted,
yeah,
uh, officially welcomed. I forget who got her, but Natasha Cloud, maybe. Do you remember?
I also forget, but I
Someone
quickly
got her ankles pretty
remember
good.
her falling, yeah, so just remember her falling, but no, but she's a great example too of, like, just developing from being a rookie to a sophomore, like, we've seen, like, yes, we knew Lexi was, like, the shooter, but I think, like, her growth on a defensive side of the floor really flourished this year for Indiana, and she's grown into a player that is extremely valuable on that team and, like, that you would have a hard time maybe cutting or deciding that you don't want her to be part of whatever your current iteration of players are. So I think, like, there's so many different areas of development that players can go for, and I don't think that, questions from when they're in college are always valid to when they do transition to the pro leagues. And yeah, Haley's very much a player that I feel like that about. Even even if the shooting stays, like, even if the shooting is ever wonky, like, I just think she's just a good playmaker that she could just be that person, that facilitator on your team. So I think, like I said before, like, her flexibility um on any roster and any, like, team, I think is gonna prove to be a good skill set for her in the W. But yeah, do you have any other rookies that you wanna give flowers to on your very long list of rookies?
I think I listed the whole rookie class, so
Okay.
I
I was gonna
probably
say.
I probably left someone out, and I'm gonna listen to this after and feel bad about it, but no, I
It's
got
okay,
nothing off the top of my head.
we'll add it in the socials, it's fine, if you
There you
leave
go, there you
anybody
go.
out. But yeah, we should put a disclaimer. Did not intend to leave anybody out. We love all players. But no, this was a fun discussion. Very curious to see who ends up making the all rookie team, especially that fifth spot. Do you know if the all rookie team has positions or it's just like straight up the five
That's a great
players?
question. I don't know the answer to that. I hope it's straight up
I feel
5.
like the rules are always changing and I lose track of like what is
Yeah.
for which award and which isn't. But I guess we'll find out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll see. I assume it's
Although,
not with positions
you know
just because
what?
like
Even if it was with positions, now that I look at our all-rookie team, I think it would work anyway. I think you got Boston
yeah.
at the 5, Dork at the
Mhm.
4, Horston at the 3, Diamond at the 2. I mean, I don't know, Diamond's
Yeah.
more of a 3, but you could like, with these positions, you can sort of, like, fudge it a little bit,
Yeah.
Diamond's not really a 2, but she, like, could be on this team, and same
Mhm.
with Grace Berger. You don't have a true point guard on this team, but if you're just doing guards and bigs, isn't that how they usually do it with position, just guards
Yeah,
and
they usually
forwards?
do guards and bigs, yeah.
Yeah, so you just make Diamond a guard, Grace Berger's a guard, and then you have 3 forwards. That works.
Boom. All right, yeah.
Nailed it.
So we'll see what happens. Nailed it. But yeah, that's all for us this week. We did have a later release time today because we were not missing the Tuesday games again. And good thing we didn't because a lot of eventful stuff happened. But you can catch us next week on Coast to Coast. Her hoop stats, playoff coverage all throughout. I know Christy and Gabe have been doing a really great job with their shows on her hoop stats as well. You can find us on social media at Her Hoop Stats, myself on Twitter at Crina MM. You can find Cal on Twitter at CWetzel31. And you can also find us on Instagram as well. If you're into social clips and little clips from the show and to short form content, please go find us on Instagram. And we will see you next Wednesday. This has been Coast to Coast.